Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, June 28, 2024. Day after the first presidential debate of the year, President Joe Biden heads to Raleigh, North Carolina, and former President Trump to Chesapeake, Virginia. The Supreme Court overturns a 40-year precedent that told federal courts to follow the opinions of experts in federal agencies when evaluating regulations that are not clear, what was known as the Chevron Deference. We'll talk about the potential impact with USA Today Supreme Court reporter Maureen Groppe. Supreme Court also limits the Justice Department's use of a federal law that makes it a crime to corruptly obstruct or impede an official proceeding when charging defendants, including Donald Trump, in the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021, during Congress's counting of the Electoral College ballots confirming President Joe Biden's victory. It could potentially overturn convictions and shorten sentences. U.S. House passes three large fiscal year 2025 spending bills for the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, and Department of State plus Foreign Operations. U.S. military removes the pier on the coast of Gaza built to bring in humanitarian aid, again due to bad weather. And there are reports the military may not reinstall that pier unless the United Nations starts taking that aid, which has been piling up, and distributing it to the Palestinians. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken releases the annual International Religious Freedom Report, an evaluation of nearly 200 countries. And country music legend Randy Travis goes before a House Judiciary Subcommittee to ask Congress to pass the American Music Fairness Act, which would require radio stations pay royalties to songs' performers. Two presidential candidates in last night's CNN debate were on the campaign trail today. President Joe Biden, Democrat, in Raleigh, North Carolina, former President Donald Trump, Republican, in Chesapeake, Virginia. WAVY-TV in Portsmouth, Virginia, writes, the historic Greenbrier Farms is the location for former President Donald Trump's first rally following Thursday night's presidential debate. The parking lot opened at 8 a.m., with the gates to the venue expected to open at 11 a.m. David Rice, a Suffolk resident, said, "We got here about 2 a.m., and the article says the traffic was so bad to get to the event, Wavy's crew covering the rally got stuck in it. Here is President Donald Trump opening that rally.
Thank you. Hello, Virginia. Did anybody last night watch a thing called The Debate? Man, that was a big one. But as you saw on television last night, we had a big victory against a man that really is looking to destroy our country. He's the worst. He's the most corrupt, the most incompetent president in the history of our country. And we have to take it back from that party. That's an evil party, despite the fact that crooked Joe Biden spent the entire week at Camp David resting, working, studying. He studied very hard. He studied so hard that he didn't know what the hell he was doing. He got the debate rules that he wanted. He got the date that he wanted. He got the network that he wanted. With the moderates he wanted. No amount of rest or rigging could help him defend his atrocious record. It's not defensible. I don't care who you were. You could be the late, great Clarence Darrow. Has anyone ever heard of Clarence Darrow? He was known as quite a good debater. Not as good as your governor, but that's okay. Hello, Governor. I can't miss this guy in the crowd. But his son's much better looking than him. Joe Biden's problem is not his age. It's not his anything, really. He's got no problem other than it's his competence. He's grossly incompetent. You know, they keep saying old. I know people that are much older than him that are doing unbelievable things, making a fortune. I knew a man that at 79, he was never a success, and he made $1 billion, $1.5 billion from 79 to 92. And that's what it is. It's not his age, it's his competence. He's not respected anywhere in the world. Our country is being laughed at all over the world. Biden is using the weaponization of his Justice Department, the FBI, local district attorneys and attorneys general to try and win an election against his political opponent. That happens to be me. Do you know who I am? Something that actually was unthinkable in our nation, but which is very common in third world countries or in banana republics. That's what he's doing. He's using law enforcement to try and hurt his political opponent. Every one of those things last night, you saw that, was all started by this guy, this crooked guy. And not only crooked, I mean, just so bad in so many ways. He's killing our country. He's incapable of winning based on his far-left policies of open borders, massive tax increases, the Green New Scam. That's a windmill on every corner, most of which don't work. And things like putting men in women's sports, really not a great idea. As every American saw firsthand last night, this election is a choice between strength and weakness, competence and incompetence, peace and prosperity, or war or no war. They like a war. They love wars. You know, they love killing people. It's so wonderful. You know, I'm the only president in many, many decades that didn't start a war. I finished one. I beat ISIS in record time.
Former President Donald Trump, Republican presidential candidate and presumptive nominee this year, campaigning today in Chesapeake, Virginia. Among those joining him, Governor Glenn Youngkin of Virginia, also Republican. The Raleigh News and Observer newspaper reporting in North Carolina just after noon, elected officials are beginning to gather at President Joe Biden's first public appearance since Thursday night's debate with former President Donald Trump, which left many political pundits asking whether Biden should end his campaign. They are among hundreds being pumped up ahead of Biden's appearance by both live performers and pre-recorded music. The Deep River Singers sang several songs before the rally began and led the crowd in a sing-along to the lyrics, "Be the change you want to see in the world." That was from the Raleigh News and Observer. It's part of President Joe Biden campaigning in Raleigh, North Carolina.
I know I'm not a young man. State the obvious. Well, I know. Well, I don't. Folks, I don't walk as easy as I used to. I don't speak as smoothly as I used to. I don't debate as well as I used to. But I know what I do know. I know how to tell the truth. I know right from wrong. And I know how to do this job. I know how to get things done. And I know, like millions of Americans know, when you get knocked down, you get back up. I know what it took to take our economy from the depths of the pandemic to where it is today, the strongest economy in the world. I know what it'll take to bring this economy to everybody. I know what it'll take to rally the world, to stand up against Putin and defend freedom, not yield to him. And I know what it'll take to keep the world safe and free for the years ahead. Folks, I give you my word as a Biden, I would not be running again if I didn't believe with all my heart and soul I can do this job. Because quite frankly, the stakes are too high. The stakes are too high. Donald Trump is a genuine threat to this nation. He's a threat to our freedom. He's a threat to our democracy. He's literally a threat for everything America stands for. Look, he doesn't understand what I think all of you do. America is the finest, the most unique nation in the world. We're the only nation in the world, and I mean this sincerely, it's a fact statement, not a hyperbolic statement, it's fact. We're the only nation in the world built on an idea. All the nations built on ethnicity, geography, and other religion, but we're built on an idea that we're all created equal. We deserve to be treated equally throughout our lives. We've never fully lived up to it. I'll be damned in the year 2024, just 2 years before the 250th anniversary of our Declaration of Independence, that I'll let Donald Trump walk away from it.
President Joe Biden campaigning in Raleigh, North Carolina, joined by First Lady Jill Biden. Meanwhile, Vice President Kamala Harris held a campaign rally in Las Vegas, Nevada, also talking about last night's debate.
President Joe Biden and Donald Trump had their first debate. And earlier today, the president said himself it was not his best performance. But there are three things that were true yesterday before the debate that are still true today. Let's level set on this. All right? First, the stakes of this race could not be higher. Second, the contrast in this election could not be more stark. And third, we believe in our President Joe Biden, and we believe in what he stands for. That's right. And to that point, we all know, let's not forget, he beat Donald Trump once. And in Nevada, with your help, we're going to do it again. And we're going to win because for all the punditry last night, for all of that, our president made clear there is a contrast between someone who lies and someone who leads.
Vice President Kamala Harris at a campaign rally today in Las Vegas, Nevada. Story from Associated Press. President Joe Biden strained to quell Democratic anxieties over his unsteady showing in the debate with former President Donald Trump as elected members of his party closed ranks around him in an effort to shut down talk of replacing him atop the ticket. Biden's halting delivery and meandering comments, particularly early in the debate, fueled concerns from even members of his party that at age 81 he's not up to the task of leading the country for another 4 years. That was from the Associated Press reporting today. Independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who wanted to be on the debate stage Thursday night, but CNN said he didn't meet the qualifications, was interviewed this morning on Fox News.
Do you think Joe Biden is fit to be president right now?
I don't think so. I think that...
Should he resign?
The decisions that are being made, particularly on Ukraine, which is bringing us so close to nuclear war, we're closer to nuclear conflict today with the Russians and China and then who are in league now with Iran, which has never happened before. That's almost exclusively because of policies of the Biden administration. This week, we colluded with the Ukrainians to send cluster bomb missiles over Russian territory, and we killed people on a beach. Cluster bombs, which are illegal in every country in the world except for 2, North Korea and ours, as war crimes. And we're now at odds with a nation that has 2,500 more nuclear weapons than we do. They have better defensive weapons, and it's...
I apologize,
and you
Robert.
want somebody in charge of our country. We want somebody in charge of our country who actually is conscious of these things, President Biden doesn't seem to be.
I got you, Robert. I only got a few seconds left. And I understand you're making a policy debate. But I'm not even talking about a policy debate because we couldn't even get to his policy last night. I'm saying from a mental standpoint, as someone that can retain and receive information, understand what's happening on the national, before he can even make the policy decisions that you're suggesting, do you think he's fit to be president based on that?
I don't think that President Biden, he does not seem to be the person who's making decisions in the White House. I think our government is being run by anonymous men in lanyards, and it's scary.
Independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. interviewed on Fox News this morning. CNN's chief congressional correspondent Manu Raju posting on X, Dem leaders not planning a direct intervention to press Joe Biden to drop out of the race after his widely panned debate performance last night, per multiple Dem sources, at least not yet. Dems want to let the dust settle with the public and assess the strength of Biden's campaign. House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries told reporters today that Biden shouldn't drop out. Asked about his reaction to Biden's performance, Jeffries said, "We are going to win the House in November." That was the post from Manu Raju, CNN chief congressional correspondent. Michael Tyler is the Biden campaign communications director. He spoke to reporters on Air Force One.
Do you firmly reject any calls for the president to consider stepping aside or not running again? Are there any conversations about that?
There are no conversations about that whatsoever. The Democratic voters nominated Joe Biden. Joe Biden's the nominee. Joe Biden, and a couple of things I would point to about this too. If you look at what we actually saw since the debate last night, we have seen, again, the president go to North Carolina, touchdown, had thousands of supporters in the state of North Carolina rally around him. But we also raised $14 million yesterday. In fact, the 11 o'clock hour was our most successful grassroots fundraising hour of the entirety of the campaign. That is Democratic voters tuning in, telling Joe Biden that they've got his back for the fight ahead because they understand that he's fighting for them.
Just a quick one. Does the president commit to appearing at the debate in September?
Absolutely. That's what we laid out when we challenged Donald Trump to 2 debates. Joe Biden will be there on September 10th. We'll see what Donald Trump does.
Michael Tyler, Biden campaign communications director, speaking to reporters as they flew on Air Force One. Story from the Washington Times, Congressman Chip Roy, Republican of Texas, said he plans to introduce a resolution calling on Vice President Kamala Harris to mobilize the administration's cabinet and invoke the 25th Amendment to remove President Biden from office. The move, which Mr. Roy announced on X, comes after Mr. Biden struggled at times during Thursday night's presidential debate to articulate his thoughts. That from the Washington Times. Congressman James Comer, Republican from Kentucky, was on Newsmax this morning.
The American people got to see what we've been seeing in Congress for 2 years now. A president that's in mental decline, a president that doesn't have the ability to fulfill the job responsibilities for the remainder of his term, much less for an additional 4 years after that. And I think what the American people got to see is that the mainstream media, who have constantly been writing stories talking about how he does push-ups every morning, that he's the sharpest guy in the room and all this. This is another lie that the mainstream media has been caught in, just like the lie about the laptop, just like the lie about there being no evidence of Biden family corruption. I mean, this is something the American people got to see in real time last night. And I think it's very damaging to the Biden campaign. And I've seen a few Democrats in the hall walking to do this interview this morning. They wouldn't even make eye contact with me. They don't know what to do. They are in panic mode. Not only are they worried about losing the presidency, they're worried about losing the House. They're worried about losing governor's races. I mean, this is a full-blown disaster for the Democrat Party.
Congressman James Comer, Republican from Kentucky, interviewed on Newsmax this morning. CNN article, registered voters who watched CNN's presidential debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump largely think Trump outperformed Biden, according to a CNN poll of debate watchers conducted by SSRS, with most saying they have no real confidence in Biden's ability to lead the country. At the same time, a majority who tuned in said it had little or no effect on their choice for president. Debate watchers say 67% to 33% that Trump turned in a better performance Thursday. That was from CNN. And Nielsen Media Research saying today that 47.9 million people watched Thursday night's presidential debate on TV. That is about 20 million fewer than watched the first debate in the 2020 election cycle between President Biden and President Trump. This is Washington Today. Story from the New York Times. The Supreme Court swept aside a long-standing legal precedent on Friday, reducing the power of executive agencies and endangering countless regulations by transferring power from the executive branch to Congress and the courts. Chief Justice John G. Roberts, Jr., writing for the majority, said that agencies have no special competence and that judges should determine the meaning of federal laws. The precedent, Chevron v. Natural Resources Defense Council, is one of the most cited in American law, underpinning 70 Supreme Court decisions and roughly 17,000 in the lower courts. That was from the New York Times. The combined cases in today's decision are Loper Bright Enterprises, Inc. v. Gina Raimondo, and Relentless, Inc. v. Department of Commerce. Senator Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, the majority leader, putting out a statement. In overruling Chevron, the Trump MAGA Supreme Court has once again sided with powerful special interests and giant corporations against the middle class and American families. And Senator Tom Cotton, Republican from Arkansas, spoke about the decision on Fox News.
Well, this case is a huge victory for the American people and constitutional government and the rule of law. It's a huge blow to the administrative state in Washington, D.C. No one elects bureaucrats to make these decisions for the American people. They elect us, congressmen, senators, and the president to make those decisions. We shouldn't be having bureaucrats making them, and Congress should be writing clearer, simpler laws that allow people to understand them and not punting off to the administrative state to make those decisions for us. That's one reason, or that's one way you get the web of regulations you've seen over the last 3.5 years. They're acting like a wet blanket on economic growth.
Maureen Groppe, a Supreme Court reporter for USA Today, joins us now for a closer look at the decision that overturned the Chevron Deference doctrine. Thanks for being with us. You write at usatoday.com that this is one of the biggest decisions of the term. What is the potential impact?
It makes it harder for regulations to stand up in court, regulations that protect the environment, protect workers, protect consumers. In the past, since this decision in 1984 that has now been overturned, the courts were supposed to defer to an agency's interpretation of a statute if the statute was not very clear and the agency's interpretation was justifiable. But in this decision, the court is saying, no, we shouldn't be deferring to the agency's interpretation anymore. It's the court's role, if the statute is ambiguous, the court's role to decide what statute actually says.
This was a 6-3 decision. What were the legal rationales of both sides?
Well, the legal rationale for the majority and the 6-3 decision split along ideological lines. They said that decision that they overturned was wrongly decided because it conflicts with something that's called the Administrative Procedures Act, and it conflicts with that by giving the agencies priority in interpreting laws instead of the courts. The three dissenters, the three liberal justices on the court, they argued about the practicality of this, that the Congress, when they write these laws, they can't fill in every detail about how a regulation is supposed to be written, and they also don't know what might be coming down the pike. And so the experts at the FDA or the EPA or whatever federal agency it is, they are the ones to take the contours of the legislation and spell that out into, well, how do you actually apply that?
What does this mean for past cases, and there were a lot of them, that relied on the Chevron doctrine?
Yeah, so that was one of the arguments that the administration made in saying, do not overturn this. They said that could create chaos by putting those past decisions in play. And Chief Justice John Roberts said that this decision is going forward. It does not undo decisions that were made in the past based on the old standard.
We're talking with Maureen Groppe from USA Today. You write, ironically, the 1984 decision stemmed from a case that cut back on environmental regulations and was applauded by conservatives at the time. Why did the sides flip in now?
Yeah, that's one of the most interesting things about this case is that the initial decision that led to this doctrine that's been overturned, that was brought by environmental groups who thought that the EPA wasn't they weren't following the law. They were letting polluters off, and they weren't following the law in doing so. And the court at that time said, we think that the law wasn't clear, and we think the EPA's interpretation was reasonable, therefore it stands. But since then, many conservatives have argued that ended up giving too much leeway to agencies and not enough to the courts. And this has been part of this challenge to this doctrine has been part of this larger conservative movement to go after what they call the administrative state for years now. They think that federal agencies have too much power, and this was a big win for them in trying to diminish that authority.
And finally, can Congress pass any law that would affect this decision?
Well, some of the groups, the public interest groups that oppose this decision, they said that Congress should effectively take the old decision that was been overturned, take that standard, and put that into law. So it would be in law that the courts would have to defer to agencies. That is probably not going to happen. But what it does do is because the court is saying that the law, that the agencies can't broadly interpret the laws, that puts a lot of pressure on Congress to make sure that the laws that they're passing, that they are clear, so we don't get these disputes that then have to be decided by a court.
Maureen Groppe, Supreme Court reporter for USA Today. You can find her articles at usatoday.com. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, spoke to reporters today about the Supreme Court's decision overturning that doctrine, the Chevron doctrine, and also another decision. As Washington Post reports, federal prosecutors improperly charged a January 6 defendant with obstruction, the Supreme Court ruled on Friday, a decision that will likely upend many cases against rioters who disrupted the certification of the 2020 presidential election, and that Donald Trump's legal team may use to try to whittle down one of his criminal cases. That was from the Washington Post. Here's Speaker Mike Johnson.
This is a big day at the Supreme Court as well. The Chevron doctrine has been overturned, and this is something that will be a remarkable turn of events. It will allow us, I genuinely believe, to exercise again Article I authority, the legislative branch. The way our framers intended this to work is supposed to have the authority to determine how the agencies of the government work and what their scope is. The Chevron doctrine since 1984 has made that a real problem because it gave deference to the agencies to interpret their own rules, and that is why the administrative state has grown so far out of control. It's one of the primary root problems that we've been trying to work through here. And so in a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court has made the right choice there. I filed an amicus brief in that case. The House filed a brief in that case, and we're delighted by that outcome. It's a long time coming. It took almost 40 years to get here. The other case that was handed down was the Fisher case today, also a 6-3 opinion, and the import of that is the decision says, effectively, the court agrees that a number of the defendants in the January 6 proceedings have been overcharged, and that is something that I also think many people have recognized for some time, and now the highest court in the land has declared that to be so.
House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, speaking to reporters today. Some Democratic reaction to the two Supreme Court cases. First, on the Chevron doctrine, Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat of Massachusetts, posting on X, "Let's call the Supreme Court ruling on Chevron what it is, a power grab by the far right to benefit the wealthy and well-connected. Corporate interests want extremist judges to write the rules at the expense of consumers, workers, safety, and the environment." And on the other case, dealing with the January 6 defendants, Congressman Benny Thompson, Democrat of Mississippi, former chair of the January 6th Investigative Committee, putting out a statement, "I am disappointed that today's overly technical opinion jeopardizes dozens of prosecutions for January 6th offenses. The conservative court, in the words of Justice Barrett, forced itself to perform textual backflips to find some way, anyway, to narrow the reach of a clearly written law which Congress passed. Those who sought to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power on January 6, 2021 still need to face the consequences of their deplorable acts. To be clear, this ruling will have an impact on only a small number of cases out of the over 1,400 criminals who have been charged and sentenced for their violent actions on that terrible day, and thankfully the Justice Department should still be able to aggressively pursue those who would undermine American democracy." That was the statement from Congressman Benny Thompson. Supreme Court says that Monday, January 1st, will be its final decision day, so we can expect a decision in the case U.S. v. Trump about whether Donald Trump can be prosecuted for his alleged attempts to overturn the 2020 presidential election, or whether presidential immunity, in whole or in part, applies. And one more decision issued today by the Supreme Court. It upheld a law in Grants Pass, Oregon, that sought to keep homeless residents from sleeping outdoors and penalizing sleeping and camping in public places, such as sidewalks and city parks. The 6-3 ruling said the law was not a violation of the constitutional ban on cruel and unusual punishment. You're listening to Washington Today. From thehill.com, the House on Friday approved a trio of government funding bills that the White House has already threatened to veto if they land on President Biden's desk, setting the stage for a bitter spending fight later this year. The three measures funding foreign operations and the Departments of Defense, State, and Homeland Security have virtually no chance of becoming law amid opposition from the White House and Democrats in the House and Senate over the spending levels, partisan policy riders, and poison pill amendments. But Republicans nonetheless have sought to clear their version of the spending bills to put the party in a stronger negotiating position during talks with Democrats down the road. That was from The Hill. The House debated these bills, plus amendments to them, over the past 3 days. And one issue that came up more than once was U.S. support or not for Ukraine. Congressman Paul Gosar, Republican of Arizona, offered an amendment to the State Department funding bill to end U.S. military sales to Ukraine. You'll hear opposition from another Republican, Mario Diaz-Balart of Florida.
My amendment prohibits funds for foreign military sales to Ukraine. The Foreign Military Sales, or FMS program, is a form of security assistance authorized by the Arms Export Control Act. As of June 7th, the United States has spent nearly $600 million in active government-to-government sales cases with Ukraine under the FMS program. The United States should not approve of foreign military sales to authoritarian foreign countries like Ukraine. Ukraine has arrested priests, raided a monastery, suspended 11 opposition political parties, and consolidated all television platforms into a state single channel. The country does not even allow presidential elections. Even more shocking is that the FMS program may be used to supply Ukraine with American weapons that can be used to strike inside Russia. Last May, the State Department approved a possible emergency foreign military sale to Ukraine of high-mobility artillery rockets, or HIMARS. Concerningly, just last month, an American-supplied HIMARS rocket system was reported to be likely used in an attack inside of Russia. I, for one, would rather not have American weapons being used on a territory of our country we are not even at war with. President Eisenhower once said that, quote, "A vital element in keeping the peace is our military establishment," end of quote. We cannot keep the peace with weapons of our military establishment being wielded against a third party, against another great power. If you truly support global democracy and liberty, end the foreign military sales to Ukraine. And with that, I ask my colleagues to vote yes, and with that, I reserve.
The gentleman from Arizona reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I rise to claim the time in opposition.
Gentleman is recognized.
So, Mr. Chairman, we use the term here, my friend, all the time, but I will tell you that the gentleman from Arizona and I are friends, and I have great respect for him. But I do have to claim the time in opposition. So Congress recently provided $1.6 billion in foreign military financing for Ukraine, not in this bill, that was already done, and other countries impacted by the situation in Ukraine. So while foreign military financing funds in this bill are not designated for Ukraine, there aren't any, let me tell you why I still respectfully have to stand in opposition. I think this just sends a pretty bad message during a time of active war. I think it would be a monumental mistake, potentially emboldening our enemies, including Russia, and sending a dangerous signal of the United States' weakness, something that, unfortunately, this administration does every single day, and lack of resolve to others around the world, including potentially communist China and other adversaries. So I will also note that House Republicans successfully secured language in the fiscal year 24 state and foreign operations bills that brings unprecedented transparency and oversight requirements on all assistance going to Ukraine, which I think is a very important thing to do, and I think all of us agree to that. So I want to repeat, there are no FMF funds in this bill for Ukraine, but it goes to, again, because the only FMF that we have in this bill goes to other key partners, and I mentioned that, like Taiwan. And so, but I just think that a prohibition and potentially sends a very bad message. There are no funds, but I think this would send a very bad message. And so I have great respect for, again, somebody who actually is a friend of mine. You know, we're good friends, but I respectfully have to oppose this amendment, and I would reserve the balance of my time.
Congressman Mario Diaz-Balart, Republican from Florida, on the House floor on Wednesday. He chairs the Appropriations Subcommittee that covers the State Department and Foreign Operations bill. The Gosar amendment, Paul Gosar, Republican of Arizona, failed by a vote of 61 yes and 350 no. It was one of dozens of amendments considered over the past couple of days to that bill and two other spending bills, and all three bills passed today by the House. The State Department bill, $51 billion, which is 19% under President Biden's request for fiscal year 2025, passed on a vote of 212 to 200. And then the House passed the Pentagon Defense Department spending bill, $833 billion. That's 1% over last year. That vote was 217 to 198. And the third bill, Homeland Security Department spending, $65 billion. That vote was 212 to 203. 3 fiscal year 2025 spending bills completed in the House and 9 to go. The new fiscal year starts October 1st, although House Speaker Mike Johnson did point out in these 3 bills it covers about 70% of the discretionary spending of the federal government. Washington Today continues in a moment.
The House will be in order.
This year, C-SPAN celebrates 45 years of covering Congress like no other. Since 1979, we've been your primary source for Capitol Hill, providing balanced, unfiltered coverage of government, taking you to where the policy's debated and decided, all with the support of America's cable companies. C-SPAN, 45 years and counting, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. That's free, and wherever you find your podcasts. Story from Associated Press: the pier built by the U.S. military to bring aid to Gaza has been removed due to weather to protect it, and the U.S. is considering not reinstalling it unless the aid begins flowing out into the population again, U.S. officials said Friday. While the military has helped deliver desperately needed food through the pier, the vast majority of it is still sitting in the adjacent storage yard, and that area is almost full. Aid agencies have had difficulty moving the food to areas further into Gaza where it's most needed because the humanitarian convoys have come under attack. Sabrina Singh is the Pentagon Deputy Press Secretary. Questioned about it today at her news conference.
And then one question on the pier. 6 weeks ago today, the pier began operating, if my math is right, and it's been down for roughly 2.5 weeks. Has the pier lived up to its expectations?
I would say it certainly has, Orrin. It might have been operating for, 6 weeks, and during that time, yes, we have had periods of time where we've had to pull it offline because of weather. We've had periods of time where we've had to do repairs. But as I mentioned in my topper, since May 17th, we've had over 19 million pounds of aid delivered to the shore in Gaza. That is, I'd say, a great success. And you have to remember that at the beginning of this year, in the State of the Union, the president directed this maritime corridor be established. And I think it has been successful because at the end of the day, not enough aid is getting into the people of Gaza. This is meant to be an additive measure. This is not meant to be the only route where aid can get in. And we've been able to deliver 19 million pounds. And yes, there is still aid that is sitting in that marshaling area awaiting further distribution. We're working with groups to make sure that happens. But I would say that our men and women in uniform have done really heroic work to get that aid to the people that need it most.
Pentagon Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh. More from the Associated Press article. The United Nations, which has the widest reach in delivering aid to starving Palestinians, hasn't been distributing food and other emergency supplies arriving through the pier since June 9th. The pause came after the Israeli military used an area near the pier to fly out hostages after their rescue in a raid that killed more than 270 Palestinians, prompting a UN security review over concerns that aid worker safety and neutrality may have been compromised. From Voice of America, the United States criticized China in the State Department's 2023 report on international religious freedom, describing the country as a repressive regime. In the report released Wednesday, the department also cited an international and domestic increase in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, which it attributed to the war in Gaza. Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke at the State Department on the report's release.
Pew Research Center recently found that government restrictions on religion had reached their highest global level since tracking began back in 2007. Today, governments around the world continue to target individuals, shutter places of worship, forcibly displace communities, and imprison people because of their religious beliefs. Some countries place restrictions on wearing certain types of religious dress, others enforce it. In some instances, governments are reaching beyond their own borders to target individuals because of their faith and their advocacy for religious freedom. In every region, people continue to face religious-based violence, religious-based discrimination, both from governments and their fellow citizens. They may be shut out of schools, denied jobs, harassed, beaten, or worse. Violent extremist groups also target people based on their faith, as we saw in the attacks last weekend on churches and a synagogue in Russia's Dagestan region, in which police, civilians, and a priest were killed. Since Hamas's horrific terrorist attack on Israel on October 7th and the subsequent conflict in Gaza, both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia have increased significantly across the globe. Here in the United States, reports of hate crimes and other incidents targeting both Muslims and Jews have gone up dramatically. The department's report tracks these kinds of threats to religious freedom in almost 200 countries. For example, blasphemy laws in Pakistan help foster a climate of intolerance and hatred that can lead to vigilantism and mob violence. In Hungary, officials continue to use anti-Semitic tropes and anti-Muslim rhetoric, and they penalize members of religious groups who criticize the government. 9 other European nations have laws that effectively ban some forms of religious clothing in public spaces. In India, we see a concerning increase in anti-conversion laws, hate speech, demolitions of homes and places of worship for members of minority faith communities. At the same time, people around the world are also working hard to protect religious freedom.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Wednesday at the State Department on the release of the annual report to Congress on international religious freedom. The Business Today news site out of India has an article. The Ministry of External Affairs on Friday said the U.S. State Department's 2023 Religious Freedom Report is deeply biased and lacks an understanding of India's social fabric. Addressing the media, MEA spokesperson Randhir Jaswal said, as in the past, the report is visibly driven by vote bank considerations and a prescriptive outlook. We therefore reject it. Wall Street today, the Dow down 45, Nasdaq down 126, S&P down 22. Country star Randy Travis, writes Billboard magazine, had members of Congress gushing and brought star power to an otherwise businesslike hearing titled Radio, Music, and Copyrights, 100 Years of Inequity for Recording Artists, held Wednesday by the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Courts, Intellectual Property, and the Internet. Travis, who has had difficulty speaking since suffering a stroke in 2013, was represented at the hearing by his wife, Mary Travis. His circumstances have made him a fitting witness and supporter of the American Music Fairness Act, or AMFA, a bill that would create a performance right for sound recordings at terrestrial radio. Unable to sing, Travis has given up touring and relies on royalties for his long-term health care. That from Billboard magazine. Here is the opening statement, part of it, from Mary Travis.
Music is, was, and always will be his lifeline. But that lifeline has changed, and we need to acknowledge that. The days of Randy packing a car and trekking across thousands of miles throughout the country to visit radio stations and deliver copies of his newest cut cassette in hopes of having his music heard are things of the past. The advent of streaming has all but replaced physical records and CD sales, and there are no guarantees that listeners are running out to buy concerts and T-shirts. Folks can hear all the music they want on demand for pennies a day. Of all the things that we do differently than we did a century ago, one thing remains the same, and that is that the voice is still the mandatory bridge between the writer and the listener. And it's time to do right by the ones that created that sound, that melody, that emotion that keeps the listeners coming back and the advertisers buying into radio. Passing AMFA bill would make many old wrongs finally right. Artists, musicians, and producers would receive a gratuity for their work. Artists would be much more inclined to collaborate with stations on projects and events. All other platforms would be more understanding of the level playing field. Artists can spend more time with their family and less time on the road. And the size and the nature of the radio station will determine the scaled fee starting at just $10 a year, structured to protect and assure continued success for stations of all sizes. You have the power to change this. And better sooner than later, as we are staring AI technology squarely in the face.
Mary Travis, the wife of country music legend Randy Travis, who's sitting beside her, at a House Judiciary Subcommittee hearing on Wednesday. Randy Travis has had trouble speaking since a stroke a decade ago. Billboard magazine article on this saying that under this proposed American Music Fairness Act, small non-commercial radio stations with annual revenue less than $100,000 would pay as little as $10 per year, and stations that earn $1.5 million in annual revenue and whose parent companies make less than $10 million would pay $500 each year. Story from The Hill. Congressman Thomas Massie, Republican from Kentucky, announced the death of Rhonda Massie, his wife of over 35 years, on Friday morning. He posted on X alongside photos of him and his wife. Yesterday, my high school sweetheart, the love of my life for over 35 years, the loving mother of our 4 children, the smartest, kindest woman I ever knew, my beautiful and wise queen forever, Rhonda, went to heaven. Congressman Chip Roy, Republican from Texas, spoke today on the House floor.
We were all saddened to learn today of the passing of the spouse of one of our members, Thomas Massie, the gentleman from Kentucky. His wife, Rhonda, of many years, they were childhood sweethearts. She suddenly passed away yesterday. Mr. Massie had to drive home to Kentucky and be home with his family, which is where he is today. I would ask everybody in the chamber and everybody around the complex to please rise and observe a moment of silence and offer your prayers and thoughts and condolences for our good friend from Kentucky.
Congressman Chip Roy, Republican from Texas, today on the House floor. Congressman Andy Barr, Republican from Kentucky, wrote on X, I'm deeply saddened by the passing of Rhonda Massie, the beloved wife of my friend and colleague Thomas Massie. Rhonda's warmth, kindness, and dedication to her family and community touched everyone who had the privilege of knowing her. Congressman Barr's wife also died unexpectedly in 2020. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter, Word for Word, and you'll get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night and weekend.